Hello, everyone. Joy Brooks, Email and Coffee. Today I'm speaking with Kendall Breitman, an American married to an Israeli citizen and living in Tel Aviv. Kendall shares her thoughts and experiences since October 7th. The conversation is one I believe everyone needs to hear because listening to others begins the healing. And now, Kendall Breitman.
Perfect.
Right. Hello, everyone. Joy Brooks, Email and Coffee. Today I'm speaking with Kendall Breitman. Hey, Kendall, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm excited to be here.
Cool.
So my name's Kendall. I am working in high tech right now, based out of Tel Aviv. I actually moved here 5 years ago. My wife is Israeli, and so we had met, and I was a journalist in Washington, D.C. at the time. I was working for NBC News before that, Bloomberg and Politico. And then just kind of as life goes, you can't really plan it. And met my wife, and after like a year of talking, decided to move over here. I've been living in Tel Aviv, and yeah, made the transition over to marketing from journalism. So that's just a little, it's like a 10,000 feet kind of version.
And we're
Yeah.
going to dive into that. So, so you moved to Tel Aviv, and that was 5 years ago. And
Yeah.
life, um, Tel Aviv is lovely,
hmm
and you settle in, and you don't speak the language.
I didn't when I moved here. So when I moved here, I didn't speak the language at all, and then really had to start from the ground up. So now I can speak like conversationally. I can understand conversations more. I need a little bit more confidence when it comes to speaking, but slowly, kind of trying to get the language.
It's 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 a the romance languages are somewhat easy to pick up,
hmm
but
At least it's in the same alphabet too, like
yeah,
with this, you have to like learn a whole new alphabet. So yeah, it really comes with its own set of challenges. I mean, even with like with English, American English, it's like things aren't in the, like you don't have nouns that are in female or male form, or like it's much more, it's a difficult language to learn.
it's one of the most difficult languages to learn, they say.
Well, that makes me feel more accomplished and more forgiving of myself for not being fluent
I would
yet.
pat yourself on the back.
Thank you. I
Having
will
been to
gladly.
having been to Israel, and they'll speak English. There's as
Yeah.
soon as they know that you're English. I mean, 90% of the people speak English,
Yeah.
but you want to. I remember walking around in Israel, and more so than other countries, you're instantly impressed upon the age of the area. So I think if you go to Egypt, if you go to Israel, if you go to Turkey, or any of the countries that were considered the Fertile Crescent, you're immediately impressed upon how old, how much history.
hmm
What were some of the things that impressed, that made an impression immediately when you got there, like that you were excited to do X?
Yeah. No, I think that actually, like the thing that impressed me the most was the culture here. Like, I don't even know how to describe how different it is from the United States, but there is just much more of a relaxed culture. I think people appreciate life here in a very different way, which, can be easily understood on that level. But I feel like people are much more caring for each other. They're much more spontaneous. There's much more of like a social kind of life here where your friends and your family, especially your family, you see them every week. It's much more of a familial culture. I joke that like Israelis seem very hard. They'll kind of like cut in front of you in the grocery line, and then they'll hear you talking on the phone about how you don't have dinner plans, and suddenly you'll be invited to their grandmother's home. Like that's kind of the joke that I have of Israeli culture, that is just, there's this toughness to it that I expected from when I lived in New York. But there's this really like heartfelt, earnest type of feeling that people have towards each other, much more familial and much more just like there's not as much of a culture of you work and you go home and you're like, nobody talk to me. It's much more like, how can I make the most of my life, of every minute that I'm here. It's hard to describe, but that's, I think, the most impressive thing to me and the biggest change and why I've loved living here.
Mm, it makes sense. I
Yep.
mean, there's also a, it's difficult in the States because we get Saturday and Sunday off and we don't even think about Saturday and Sunday. You guys get Friday and Saturday off
Hmm.
and go back to work on Sunday.
Yeah. So
And
our weekends are just like one day kind of scooched over. That took me a bit to get used to, I've got to say. Especially I'll still say like on Monday, let's do this. And I mean Sunday.
right, right. And Friday and Saturday are for all the people, a religious holiday. It's Sabbath for all the people, for
Hmm.
everyone.
Hmm.
For Saturday, I it's not Saturday. The For the Israelis, it's Friday night to Saturday.
Yeah.
For the Arab population, is it Saturday?
Hmm.
So the weekend is not just time off. It's sort of it's time to contemplate, to
Yeah.
some
I mean,
extent.
exactly. I would say that also plays into what I was just speaking about. This kind of like what I also love is this kind of like slowed down culture that the weekend isn't for I need to get as many errands done as possible. You have that on Friday, and then on Friday at sundown, everything closes. And then Saturday is much more, that's when you'll like meet up with a friend or kind of have a day in, much more relaxed. So Saturday is much more of like a recoup day. Friday is when you get your errands done. But even when you're getting those errands done, it's just like what I didn't realize in the United States was how little like real interaction I was having throughout my day with people that I was interacting with. For example, I go to a gigantic supermarket and I meet with the cashier, and then I'm out. Or I go to a Target, these gigantic kind of stores. Whereas here, it's like you have the person you buy your meat from, you have the person you buy your flowers from, you have like there. It's all very like small business type of feeling, and it lets you slow down. Same thing with like even package deliveries. Like when I go to the US, I like am constantly reverse culture shocked by the fact that you can order something and get it delivered the next day. Like everything is just a lot slower here. That you order something, you're like, I hope it's here in a month. And when it is, it's not dropped off at your door. It goes to, well, at least in Tel Aviv, it goes to like a mini mart that you have to like go and get your stuff from. It's a whole thing. But basically, yeah, it's beyond just being the days of the weekend differently, there's also just like a different vibe of what the weekend means.
Hmm. Hmm. It's a wonderful thing. Everyone I speak with, when I went to Israel, it was a wonderful experience, and the people that I speak with, it's always been a wonderful experience. And
Good.
and then, obviously, the elephant in the room is what's going on in Israel right now. So,
Yeah.
do you want to add anything about that? What do you want to add? Because I don't want to ask you specific questions
Mhm.
that may, I don't know, may impact you in different ways. How are
I
you making it, work these days?
Yeah, I first of all appreciate that because I think that in this conversation, we are a culture, I'm talking about Americans, we're a culture that is very like we're very cognizant of the way that different things can trigger people. And I do think that there is kind of a blind spot when we're talking about this of how maybe different words are actually triggering to people because Americans are so far away from it that they
Mhm.
might not realize what does and when that does. And so that's been kind of hard to navigate. So, first of all, really appreciate you kind of approaching it from that way. I'll say that, like, first off, what I have, like, what I want to contribute to the conversation is that I think that the best way to connect with people and understand people is to hear their stories. I think that stories are like, that's my big driver, whether that was in journalism or now in podcasting. I think that sharing stories is like a really important way to get to know people and get to build those bridges. So I guess like just in that way, that my story and what I kind of want to impart on people is really just how much this has affected my life, affected my loved ones' lives here. That living in this, what's become like a global news story, like the day to day of everything. I
Mhm.
mean, there's the kind of obvious in the way that we have missile sirens. And then when you're in Tel Aviv, that means that you have 60 to 90 seconds to find shelter. So that can happen anytime throughout the day. But more so just like how much this affects just everybody. Like there's not a single person that I know, like not a single person in my life here that doesn't know somebody who was killed, kidnapped, or injured on October 7th,
Mm.
or has been killed, kidnapped, or injured since.
Mhm.
And it's kind of the breadth of that. It's having every single person you know in your life be like directly touched by it.
Mhm.
Um, has had a lot of weight. I think that it's a collective kind of mourning for the people, for people's loved ones. I think that it's like a continued kind of psychological torture to see how this is all played out and to see the reactions of people on both sides of the spectrum. It's been difficult to see the way that the conversation has turned almost into sport, like it's team sports, that to be pro one side means that you're anti the other, that like the gray area and the actual like lives of real people have almost just been overshadowed by this constant stream of news that puts people in different teams, you know? And I
Mm.
think that's been really difficult to navigate because like life is life. And do you go through and say, I agree with every single thing on this side of the list, or I agree with every single thing on the, no, that's not how that works. Is everything black and white? Can you just say, oh, this person is X, Y, and Z, so that must mean they believe in A, B, and C? No. So I think that the diversity of opinion, I think that the personal impact that it has on people that are living through this is something that's just kind of lost in the conversation and
Mm.
hard. But I understand why, because it's like it's really hard to discuss.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
I think I think I haven't lived through something like this, but I'm wondering if this is something common in war when you're faced with humanity, not so
Hmm.
much you're um, you're a soldier type of a thing. And even still with soldiers, I think there are many times when soldiers were suddenly faced with humanity, and the concept or the prerequisites of war are suddenly ripped away, and you're looking at a human, and
Yeah,
you.
I mean, and even these, like what we were saying with these soldiers, like even before this, Israel has one of the highest rates of PTSD in the world. Like when everybody has to be in the army, it's incredibly, it's huge how many people have PTSD here from
Right.
having to be in the army and then like having to experience that and then to continue to live their lives. And that's when they're 18 to 20, 21. So, yeah, I think that when I say, I hate to say both sides because there's just so much like nuance that comes in that. There are a
Mhm.
million sides, you know? But, I think that what both sides are missing from each other is the humanity and how this feels. So, like, for example, on October 7th, my wife was camping in the southeast. So she was a bit farther away, but she was camping in a tent in the middle of the desert.
Mhm.
And so that day, you wake up at 6 a.m. to sirens, you hide in your bomb shelter if you have one, or if you don't, then you have to go under a set of stairs in your building. And then it's just like the flood of seeing people searching for their friends that were at the music festival, seeing people searching for their loved ones that live down south. It was like, I like imagine just going through your social media and every single story is somebody like begging to find their best friend.
Mhm.
Like it was, and from that moment, it hasn't let up. It's just been this constant, like traumatic experience, I feel. And then I think that on top of that, it's been this traumatic experience that, like, the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to you in your life becomes the world's most talked about story and most parsed about story. And then suddenly people who have never even thought about this maybe before are now coming into it so passionately and saying things on both sides that are
Mhm.
so driven in kind of violence that they don't have to face, that it's really hard to be here and have to see how those words impact people and the danger that they have to face, while other people just kind of post on Instagram, close their phone, and walk away, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. It's
Yeah.
a- and I mean, there are incidents net right now going on in the Ukraine, and again, we tend to create a story around it and
Yeah.
believe the story that we want to believe, and we forget the people, the history, all of the things that are going on a number of different levels, where whereby there are people going to work every day trying to manage um, a life suddenly uh,
Flipped upside
gone
down.
viral. I mean, their
Yeah.
lives have gone viral.
Yeah.
They realize that at any point in time, um, there's a story that's going to encircle them that they may have absolutely no control in. And
It's like, just not to interrupt, but I just came to, like, I'm right now worried to be happy or sad in an outward way, like to post anything on my social media because of how it might offend somebody that's living on the other side of the world, how my experience might offend them. Like 3 days after October 7th, I posted something just about like, like the post just read like, it's okay to feel and it's okay to hurt. And that just means that you're human. And like, it doesn't matter, but in the scheme of life, it like in like a bigger way it does. I had like good friends unfollow me or people block me after I posted that. And it doesn't, like, at the end of the day, it's unfollows and people on social media, but it's a sentiment that like this conflict has become so impassionate from people around the world that the people that are living it, like, to be honest, I'm nervous to be on this podcast right now. I'm nervous to post about my life. I'm nervous to celebrate my own birthday
I
because I'm worried, like, because that happened a few weeks ago, because I'm worried that somebody else from the other side of the world will think that that's not okay, that my live like or that they don't ask for my lived experience. They don't say, how was that day for you? They don't ask how my life is. It's just like, it's become so it's become a story but not a discussion. And
Mhm.
that's been like, it's people
It's
are
become a
dug
meme
into
and
how,
an avatar as well. I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
encapsulated with, oh, she's this,
yeah, yeah,
and
it,
or and I think women are more sensitive,
mhm.
although I don't want to necessarily go down that rabbit hole. The way women look at social media and men look at social media, it's slightly different.
Yeah,
um
for sure. But it's also just like, yeah, it's been really hard to also feel like you don't have an outlet for that. That like, that again, like talking about this most traumatic thing in your life, like, usually if you have this kind of traumatic thing, you want to be able to open up to your friends, to your family, to like, like, about what you're going through, and that's part of healing. But I feel like that part of healing has been kind of ripped away because the thing that I'm sad about is one of the most politically charged things in the world right now,
right now.
you know? And I also think that biases play into it. I think that how Americans see this conflict right now is also based in their own bias of how they grew up, of what they see as people living here,
Mhm.
who they think those people are. Like
Right.
my friends, when I talk with them, are like, we're surprised to hear that like my wife is her family's from Libya. They're like, oh, I didn't realize, but like 65% of Jewish people living here are from North Africa and the Middle East. Or you see articles saying that like that the food culture is stolen from these lands. No, they're people who actually moved from Iraq, from Iran, from Morocco. They're not stealing those foods. That's their culture that they've had to bring to another place as refugees themselves. It's just like it's I think that the lens that we're viewing this from while we're having this discussion, I'm saying we as Americans, is sometimes based in biases that we don't know that we have because we're lucky enough to grow up in a place that has never experienced this and gives us our own lens on how the world works and how the world is.
Mm-hmm. In many ways, that's a statement on how a lot of Americans think about a lot of things.
Yeah.
You know, I don't like to use the word privilege because it's overused, but we're very lucky that Iowa, if you've lived in Iowa, you've never seen any type of war at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you've seen road rage, right? But it's very peaceful in Iowa.
But
It's
like
very peaceful in Kansas. Once you go to the bigger cities, it gets a little rushed, and perhaps you might think if you're from a backwater town, a more rural area, if you go into the cities in the United States, you may think that, oh, I've been to New York, so now I can make it anywhere.
No.
You've still only seen a bit. You've still only seen a bit.
But then like to dig into like how is that possible? Like, how has the US set themselves up to make sure that somebody in Iowa never has to experience that? And to be honest, it's on the back of people here and on the back of people all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I got to grow up watching what happened, like the chemical warfare in Syria on my television.
Mm-hmm.
My wife, who grew up here, was bringing home a gas mask from middle school.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just it's such a different reality that we face in the US, and I think that we're very lucky to face that in the US. So sometimes I just would like for there to be more listening than this kind of like perceived authority when we are really blessed to not have to be living the way that other people around the world have to live based on the lottery of life of where we were born.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a wild world out there. Once
Yeah.
once you get over the fact that you had a fight with your best friend, or your car's old and you need a new one, or you hate your job. Once you get over those the layers of the onion skin, then you realize that there are more layers, and then if you open up, you really do realize all of the layers of that onion. And that's like the onion skin of life, the onion of life, where it's sweet and it's pungent and it's makes you cry sometimes. Oh, wow, I picked a good onion.
Yeah.
It's, I think it's our responsibility as humans to do this, regardless of where we are. We need to keep an open mind, and we need to reach out to people.
Yeah.
Instead of saying this is how I feel, how does that person feel?
Yeah.
I don't need to have, really. Yes, I need to have I could have an opinion. I have the right to have an opinion.
Yeah,
But
of
I
course.
don't really think it matters in the big picture unless there's a call to action, at which point I might need to make a choice. I'm not forced to make a choice here.
Yeah.
I'm not forced to make a choice. You're acting every day. You're not making a choice. You're acting every day. I doubt that you wake up in the morning saying, I'm not going to be kind to so-and-so. I think, you're acting spur of the moment every day, where everything becomes an act of kindness.
Yeah. I do also feel like the very few silver linings of this is I do feel like people are like here have been more kind to each other in that way. There's more of like a sense of humanity. I mean, there always has been, but it's just kind of like everyone's much more willing to give each other a break on things like work or on things like if you make plans and somebody's like, look, I'm just not in the right headspace. It's just that's at least been kind of good as like a reminder of humanity. It's similar to the way that like I kind of feel like COVID was a reminder for like parenthood, that like that workplaces were much more likely to become a little bit more flexible with somebody who has a child at home, because
Hmm.
we were understanding like, yes, we all have lives outside of work, we all have feelings outside of work, and so there's been some of that.
Yeah, COVID definitely, COVID definitely forced a pivot and a mindset that hasn't stopped, and it caused quite a lot of anguish and helplessness that hasn't stopped. Um, and there's a lot, there's quite a lot going on in the world. Quite a lot going
Hmm.
on in the world. We all
Yeah.
need to. Sometimes I like to think of it as we need to stop reacting to everything, because we all have triggers, and that reaction is sometimes not the best thing to do or say.
Hmm.
It's like knee jerk reaction. And especially when you're all tuned up. I mean, we're all we're all tuned up. We're expecting something. We're expecting something. So it's we need a little um individual humanitarian efforts, every day. It's sort of like reset the clock. Don't carry it over from yesterday. Yesterday may have um been difficult, but if you carry that around today, it becomes more difficult, and then you're literally suddenly, you're pushing the rock up the hill, and
Yeah.
you don't realize when it happened. And for many people, there is a real rock.
Yeah, for
Do you
sure.
do you do you does it ever occur to you that you want to go back into journalism? I mean, given the situation, or are you like, I'm so glad I'm not in journalism right now?
I think that I'm glad that I'm not in journalism right now. I think that it's a hard, if it was like if I was reporting on here, it's just a hard job to do. Um, so no, I haven't really had that feeling of wanting to go back into journalism. But I mean, I do then sometimes feel frustrated where I feel like there are different stories that are not being put out, or there are some stories that are being put out than more than others, like that kind of thing. So I wish that there was more of like a depth and breadth to coverage. But
Hmm.
I also haven't really been seeing what American coverage is like. I'm mostly like I kind of see it, but I mostly have been watching the news in Hebrew and listening to the news in Hebrew. Yeah.
Um,
The only way that I do sometimes wish that I was a journalist is because I do think that a lot of the stories that are coming out in Hebrew speaking channels are because like for people like the hostages, they're speaking in Hebrew. So I wish that maybe I could try to get those stories out in English, like get an English version of those and be able to report those. So that could be a good idea. But otherwise, no,
mm.
no, I've not been jealous of my colleagues in the news.
Did you get burnout? Were you
Yes.
that's is that why you I
Yeah.
can only imagine that that's got to be a very difficult job.
Yeah, so I was covering the 2016 election for Bloomberg and traveled for 2 years entirely, just like out of a suitcase, would come home for a few days and travel again. And that was really nice. I loved it. It was like such a rush to get to do that. And then the election season kind of settles. Trump was elected. And then even though the day to day with Trump was insane, it's still like it wasn't the election. I was kind of like gearing up wanting to be an election reporter. And then I moved to DC because I was working later at NBC. They wanted to start a new show, and so they brought me down to DC to help be the producer on that show. And I think that that was kind of the moment where I went to DC and saw that like everyone is working constantly. Everybody has two phones. Everybody is constantly plugged in. You'd be at a dinner with some colleagues, and then there'd be breaking news, and half the table have to leave. And so it just kind of like was a confrontation moment for me that, like, do I love this? Like, am I like living to work or working to live? Like, is this, because for some, you'd see how passionate some people were about it. And I just kind of felt like, when I did have to get up from those dinners or go do other things, like I felt annoyed by it rather than driven by it.
Mhm.
So I don't know if it was like burnout as much as it was just kind of like looking around and taking stock on my future and whether or not that's what I wanted my future to look like.
Mhm. I I think people in Washington end up getting wrapped up, and it's in a like a whirlwind that may dump you out. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years may never dump you out,
Hmm.
and you're going around and around and around, and and you get used to that. You get used to that.
Of course, yeah. I mean, and also it just like I think that there's kind of stock in what you do. So I also was kind of realizing that I loved part of what I loved about what I did was like I'm a kind of person like I care. I'm gonna be the first to admit that I care about what people think about me. Like
Mhm.
it's something that I need to improve on, but it's something that I know about myself. And so I was starting to realize that maybe I didn't love my job as a reporter as much, but maybe I loved how my job as a reporter looked in other people's eyes, like the
Mhm.
reflection of that in someone else's eyes. Like like that everyone at that time was like, "You're a reporter during the Trump administration. It's so important. It's so huge. Like it's such an important story, and it is. But how like was I coming home every day happy with my work, or was I coming home every day feeling like you should be happy with your work because everybody else thinks that what you're doing is amazing?" And then it was kind of just taking stock and realizing that like I needed in myself to care about
Mhm.
what I was doing and to be passionate about that and not just be passionate about the fact that other people thought it was cool, you know?
Right. Well, that may be a statement for 75% of Washington. It's how they
Yeah.
think. It may be. It, there is the element of the states that thinks that the people in Washington are mm, not aware of how the rest of the U.S. is thinking, and that's because they're
Yes.
in that whirlwind.
Yes. And to kind of loop it back, it's like, and then imagine you live in a completely other country that they've never been to. You know, there's also that. It's like we expect our you'd say to a politician, you don't know what my life is. You've never lived here. You don't know what my day to day is. But then also at this other side of their mouths being like, this is what I think should happen on another part of the world. You know, like there's kind of this hypocritical, like this hypocrisy of this, of like this claimed understanding of what somebody else's life is like that we don't even expect like I remember when I was living in DC, there are there aren't really like representatives in Washington DC because it's not its own state. So DC obviously is fighting for statehood. But what would happen was that like kind of the regulations were made by the elected officials of other states. And there was an argument saying like why should somebody that was elected in Iowa or Nevada or something like that come here and make the laws for DC, you know? And it makes sense because a a lived experience that comes with understanding how to help other people's lived experiences. And it's hard to do that when you never leave Washington, you know?
Hmm. Hmm.
It's hard to do that when you don't leave the US to experience other life.
Right, right. Well, that is one of the reasons to travel and not to travel. Um, like I'm leaving Thursday and I'll be back Monday. That doesn't that allows you to breathe the air and taste the food and drink the wine, but you don't get the nuance of the people.
Yeah,
And um, I mean, the world is rich with lots of people. I don't think everyone necessarily understands that how people critically think slightly different things because they value perhaps the family more than they value their job. And
exactly.
that
Or
ripples
the
out, quite a bit. And we were, the U.S. is a baby in the world. We're here for 200 years. What are we? What do we know? When we first came here, we were all immigrants,
mhm,
and in the ensuing years, immigrants still continue to come and continue to create the U.S. that we are today.
Yeah.
I'm choking. And I'll continue to choke. But that's what makes the States so different than the rest of the world. And in many ways, I'm still choking.
Yeah,
In
take
many
your time, don't
ways.
worry.
And for example, we might think of Russia as being some homogeneous type of people,
Mhm.
where half, you go to a particular point in Russia, and you go east, and they're clearly not Europeans anymore. They're clearly Asian.
Mhm.
Go south, and they're clearly yet another type of Asian. And we in the States don't even realize that.
Yeah.
So we would think, oh, Russia is. We have
Mhm.
no idea what Russia is. No idea. No idea.
Exactly.
And
Or yeah, like for example, I would say that like so like in the United States, American Jewish people are 90% Caucasian, at least Caucasian presenting. In Israel, it's 65% North African and Middle Eastern Jews.
right.
So first of all, it begs the question, why is that? You know,
Mm-hmm.
like why did that happen? Is that because the United States didn't necessarily let those people in? And in that case, where did they go? And when did they go? And so, like, when you even root back to that, it's understanding that these aren't like this white colonial settler type of vibe that acts like people just like that people just one day decided, like, oh, I should probably get out of here and I want to go to Israel because that's where my homeland is. Like, that's not how that worked. For for even my own family, it's like, and by that I mean the family that I've married into. It's like they had to leave where they were where they lived because their homes were being actively burned down while they were inside of it. They tried to go to the United States. They were not able to go to the United States. So instead, they were sent to the only place they could go, which was Israel, and then dumped in a refugee camp in the middle of the desert. Like, that's not the narrative that we're hearing right now. The narrative that we're hearing right now is this whole settler idea. Now, is it okay that that the UK took a group of refugees and then put them in a place and then it later created another group of refugees? No, absolutely not. But to ignore that history and then act like it's just a bunch of people who decided, like, I'd like some warmer weather. Like, that's not how this worked. And it denies people, it first of all, like, projects your own biases on what Jewish people are. Because in the US, I mean, even when I moved here, we went to a food bazaar. And when we left, I said to my wife, I was like, wow, there's like Iraqi and Iranian food. How do they know how to make that? And she was like, are you serious? Like, she started laughing at me. And she's like, because they're Iraqi and Iranian, you idiot. Like, it's just like I was that ignorant to the people that were actually living here. And I grew up Jewish, but I didn't know that. The people that I know are from Poland and Russia and from like Eastern Europe. And so it's just like there's that kind of understanding of who these people are that but the reality is that there's much more painful stories behind the reasons why people are here.
Mm-hmm.
And then earlier we were talking about how like meeting people and family and all of that stuff affects how you live. But what's really important to also note is how much trauma affects how you live. You know, before I moved here, I never in my life had a moment where I had to run for my life. That's obviously very different now, you know, and you look back on that and you're like, wow, I can like the first time that we had a missile here, I saw my wife jump up and immediately lock up our home and like make it like shelter proof it.
Mm-hmm.
Like she was closing. So we're lucky enough to have a shelter inside of our home, which is crazy that we have to. But so she was like closing the iron windows and locking the door. And these are all skills I had to be taught. I had no idea how to do that. That's a skill that she grew up with, knowing how to do, and didn't even realize that it's a skill she had growing up because it's just life here, you know? So there's a lot to be said about what it's like to grow up in in a completely different area of the world, where trauma also is a driving factor of what you feel and think and have experienced.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, while you said a lot of people have PTSD, I
Yeah.
think the endurance level is higher. So what we would think of as
Oh
some
yeah.
sort of trauma,
You
there's
have to
no
hear
skin off their back because their level is so high.
to get any sort of leave or things like that from work, you have to quote unquote kind of prove your PTSD. You have to go to a psychologist. They have to say that it's at a certain level, that's because if anyone could just say, I experienced PTSD, then our workforce would be cut by more than 50%.
Yeah. And
That's how
everybody,
prevalent it is with
right.
everyone. You need to prove that you have some sort of extreme case in order to get any sort of medical type of benefit from it, because it's that commonplace.
If Israelis do come to the States all the time, but I can guarantee you that the first day that they're here, and depending on where they go, the airplanes that fly overhead, they're and we don't even hear them.
Yeah.
We don't even.
I grew up by a firehouse, and they have a siren that they'll play, that they'll have. And we went home for my wedding, for the US wedding. And it was just a little backyard thing, but the siren went off, and you could see the way that my wife reacted. She had to walk away.
Right.
There are things that you just don't even, yeah.
And you probably didn't even hear the siren.
No, I grew up hearing that, and so it just I block it out.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as it played and I knew that she was there, I was like, oh no. Because that's just, she has a different experience with it, you know?
I am. I think I was in Israel in '87. I think that was when I was in Israel, and I was in Caesarea. I was actually doing an archaeological dig,
Mm-hmm.
and we traveled quite a bit. Not too much south, but some south, and then north, and then east. So we did a little bit of travel. And there was one point, I don't remember where we were, but fighter jets flew, and I was just like, "Those aren't planes. Those are,"
Mm-hmm.
and they all looked at me, and they said, "Oh, yeah, those are." And they're going, and they told me where they were going, and they said they'll be back, and they won't be carrying anything. They'll be empty because they'll have done what they needed to do. And sure enough, they came back about whatever time later, and I was like, never. Fighter plane? It
Yeah.
would have to be 4th of July for me to see a fighter plane.
Yeah. I mean, usually, for me, that hadn't been something that I'd really seen before all of this. So it hasn't been I wouldn't say that it's super commonplace. But I mean, even now, when you hear helicopter, there are no helicopters flying over Tel Aviv right now. When you hear a helicopter, you know that it's a soldier being taken to a Tel Aviv hospital to land on the helipad there. And so it's just every sound. You hear a helicopter and you're you know what that means. You the way that sounds already affect me. Swelling noises, especially if there's a motorcycle and it's the zoom, my heart will stop. It's
It's a different
crazy
world.
it's a different world. It really
It's a
is.
different world. So, when you how did you travel? The first few months that you were in Israel, did you travel?
Within Israel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I will
And
say though, I do spend most of my time in Tel Aviv, so I do kind of live in this little bit of a bubble, like a metropolitan liberal bubble over here.
right. The reason I was asking, what I did a little, like I said, I did a little bit of traveling, and I think it was Bethlehem that I went to, and I realized, do you know who stepped these streets? I mean, we're talking about possibly the apostles, possibly
Mhm.
Jesus. I mean, and I'm like, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And those are not the things you think about when you're walking the streets in New York. You don't think,
Yeah.
you know, occasionally I do this, and perhaps it's odd for me. Occasionally on Long Island, I'll look out and around, and I'll think, this was once all Native American country. And,
Mhm.
there were paths, but this was all tall grass, big trees. And I actually see it in my mind's eye. And I did that in Israel.
Mhm.
My mind's eye went back 2,000, 3,000 years. And I was like, there's a difference when you travel to countries that have, you can almost smell it. The smell of the country's different. You can almost smell the history. I mean, that was me. And
It's fried falafel bowls.
yeah, exactly. Well, it is, it's all of the different spices and all of the things going on around you. And the fact that, the hygiene is different, and, it has been different for thousands of years. And, I don't know if a lot of people think on that level. That's how I think. And, I was impressed, with Israel on that level. And I can only tell you that that's not something the rest of the world understands. And even, if when you're in Rome, there are the people in Rome that know their history. And that's the same thing. It's the same thing. When an American goes to the Forum and looks at the Forum and goes, wow, the Italian that's lived in Rome all their life, that knows the Roman history, it's almost, um, you know, like living in. Am I going to get my history? Living in Pennsylvania and having grown up near Gettysburg.
Mhm.
We've only got 200 years, right? We've only got two.
Yeah.
So, somebody in Rome has got all that rich history. Somebody in Israel has even more rich history. And for those people that have migrated into Israel from Lebanon, from Libya, from Jordan, from Iraq, Iran, Turkey. I mean, we can keep going because that's what's happening.
Yeah.
They have even more history, and we can't even imagine. We can't even imagine that, and it's getting erased.
And and they have exactly, and they have this history that's really a painful history. It's not a history of like picking up and moving your family to another part. Like it's a painful fleeing of a place
Mm-hmm.
to then come to another place to then like and kind of be forced to come to that place. And in this case, it was the UK that had kind of colonized the land at that point. So they give it to people here that are coming, and it's the only place that they can go. So then they go, they start a family, they are there for generations. They're also like we're ignoring too the people who have been here for generations and generations. Like this isn't
Right.
like this has been like a long, long time predating even the independence of the state of Israel.
Right. Right.
That like then they grow their families, they have generations of families living here, and then now we fast forward a few years and then the same people in places like the UK are turning around and saying, how dare you be here? Look what you've done to this place. You should leave because you're all European. And you kind of look back at it and you're like, how do you think we got here? Who do you think
Yeah,
put us
it's
here?
so complicated. It really is
Yeah.
complicated. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not like.
It's not as black. It's not black. What I mean to say is that it's like, it's not black and white, and it's driven on a lot of underlying emotions that come from a lot of underlying trauma for a lot of groups of people in here, in Gaza, in the West Bank, everywhere.
Mm-hmm. The, I am an historian, and I think through the lens of an historian, and I realize that what 5,000 BC, possibly, people were 5,000, which makes it 7,000 years ago. People are coming and going from Egypt into the Fertile Crescent, and Israel is right in between. So it's part of the trade route, and people are
Hmm.
settling there. Lots of different people. Greeks
Yeah.
are settling there. People, from the Babylon, from Assyria, from the Hittites. I mean, we can keep
Yeah.
going back and back and back, and lots of different peoples are settling. That was that was the background. That's the background music of the area. Lots
Yeah.
of different people moving from Africa back and forth, back and forth, and some people coming down from Europe. But in those days, um, it was obviously not as settled, and a lot of the people were tribal, so they were very distinct looking.
Mhm.
And now, 5,000 years later, here we are.
Yeah.
7,000 years later, here we are. We don't know that story. We don't understand that story. We don't understand what it's like to live in Egypt, during the pharaohs. We
Yeah.
don't know what it's like to live in Israel, where there are two lands. There's the north and south kingdoms, and maybe the temple hasn't even been built yet. The religion is just beginning. There's so much history in the area. The
Yeah.
people are, over those 7,000 years, there's a common heritage with these people.
Exactly. I say this all the time that I think that sometimes Americans think like they see Israel reflected in like the US reflected in Israel. And then there's like the like kind of it through their eyes, like kind of like the more quote unquote Middle Eastern, which would be like the Palestinians. But the reality is that like these two groups of people are more related to each other
Other,
than they are to the people I grew up with.
right.
Like that's what makes it heartbreaking. And there's also, I mean, there's a million things that make it heartbreaking, but like there's also just this kind of like, just like I'm talking about the history of people in Israel, there's also that shared history of people living in Gaza and the West Bank.
Right.
It's like that these are two groups of people who have been displaced throughout the years by Western governments and Western cultures. And then we're kind of like turning around, and it seems a little bit like history is repeating itself with the way that it isn't, as I talked about before, instead of discussion, it's just kind of people yelling at each other. Like, so how do you actually solve this? How do you make people be able to grow up and live in peace, just like your children, my children in the United States would be able to without question,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I just think that it's about,
I think
yeah.
the states, we're stuck on this Nazi thing where everybody's a Nazi. So if you're not
Mhm.
good, you're a Nazi.
Yeah.
And it's like we're stuck. So we're equating, because of the last pages of immigration to Israel, we're equating the World War II, Germany,
Mhm.
and all of
Yeah.
the Europeans that were displaced and moved to Israel. We're equating this, Nazism in Germany and the way people were treated to what's going on right now.
Yeah.
And
Or
it's not what's going on right now. That's not what's going on.
exactly. Or through an American lens as being equated to 9/11, which I do also understand. But like
Mm-hmm.
where it differs for me is this depth and breadth of like, now imagine that every single person that you know knows somebody who had died that day. Like it's that kind of level of it kind of hitting everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And then imagine kind of understanding that maybe your government's not always doing the best stuff. Like,
Right.
you know,
Well,
which like, because even to back it up, like there were tons of like we did like 40 consecutive weeks of protests against Bibi Netanyahu.
mm-hmm.
Like he already had like a 27% approval rating.
Mm-hmm.
So then imagine that like something like that happens, something like 9/11, and then the amount of trauma that it feels for people to then turn around and be like, when you're grieving it, and people to turn around and go, yeah, but doesn't America do some really horrible stuff in the Middle East? That's how that kind of feels, in this way that it's like, we can recognize that like most of the country here is not pro Netanyahu. And actually, after the October 7th, it's gone down even more. And now protests have started back up to try to get him out of office. But like this inability to kind of separate the lived experience of civilians, of people who are living this with their governments, I think is also something that isn't afforded to people here. So like just like it's that Israelis are somehow a reflection of Netanyahu, that Gazans are somehow a reflection of Hamas, it's like this inability, inextricableness of people from their governments in this region is also really detrimental and really scary and sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's sort of, after 9/11, and we bought weapons of mass destruction,
Mm-hmm.
and the insanity started.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I mean, to get people into World War II, they had to pass a lot of propaganda. Winston Churchill had to pass a lot of propaganda to the U.S. because we wouldn't enter the war. So
Yeah.
to extricate that from the actual humanity of war itself, to extricate
Mm-hmm.
that, you get again to another whole different layer where you're not aware of what's really going on. I mean,
Yeah.
Like you said, Netanyahu is not Mr. Popularity, and prior to this, there had been quite a lot of people that have talked against him.
Yeah, and not just that, but there's also a different rule of play when it comes to this area of the world. So, for example, like I've been talking about this with friends here, like this has become for both sides the amount of money flowing into Israel, the amount of money flowing into Gaza. This has become one of like the biggest fundraisers for both governments right now. And so when you think of somebody like Netanyahu, who was already unpopular, and then he's saying, okay, as long as the war keeps going, then we're not going to, like, we shouldn't discuss changing the government. Then why, if you're Netanyahu, would you end the war? Because as long as you're keeping the war going, you're in power.
Right.
It's the same kind of thing with Hamas, too. It's like two governments who are more interested in keeping their power than they are in keeping their own people safe at times. So that's something that, again, Americans, we can't wrap our heads around because there are kind of rules of play a bit more.
But those are the undercurrents of every single war.
Yeah.
Where the people get dragged in to act it out, and the powers that be have a whole different plan, which gets you into conspiracy theories and down rabbit holes. But to some extent, there is that reality, and you can't divorce yourself from it. You have to recognize it and say, I can only do what I can do, right? So here I am. I need to fight. But here, Anne Frank, right? We have Netherlands, Denmark. I can't remember. Belgium.
Netherlands.
Netherlands. Okay. So they're under German rule, and at the kindness of their hearts, they're hiding people in their houses, which will get them killed.
Yeah.
And they're not Jewish. They're all different religions. Or maybe they're atheists in those days, for goodness. Maybe they're socialists. Who knows? They're hiding people in their houses. And that's when people step in and act. And that's when people are courageous. That's when those are the real heroes of the world. I'm not saying the soldiers are not heroes, but I am saying that the singular acts of kindness, hopefully, that's what roots humanity. That's what keeps us going forward. Because we're cruel. Okay, we're ambitious. We're cruel. We're not humans are not perfect, but we are incredibly passionate. And sometimes that happens in the oddest ways. Like you said, you're online in a food mart, somebody cuts in front of you, you're like ready to kill them, and they suddenly invite you to dinner.
Yeah, I agree with that. I will just say, because I'm living a particularly pessimistic part of my life, that
Don't
when you
give
hear
up.
those stories,
Don't give up.
no, but like when you hear those stories, you're like, but how did so many people rat out the people that were holding the 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 Jew holding Anne Frank or something like that? Because at that time, that's the power of propaganda and the power of thinking you understand something when maybe you don't. Because I bet that the people who called the Germans and said, "Hey, that guy's hiding a Jew in his home," probably thought that they were like being some sort of hero in
Mhm.
this.
Yes,
And
yes,
that's what I think
absolutely.
that everyone needs to check, is that like there is a lot of space for discord, and it should be happening because like there are a lot of horrible messed up things going on. But in that discord, let's try to keep encouraging violence against other people or assumptions about other people not in the conversation, because while it's easy to unfollow other people or close your phone, like one of my friends had recommended, like, why don't you just go out for a walk? And I'm like, you don't realize that for me, I don't get to leave my phone at home and go for a little stroll. Like it's just, that's not where we're at right now. So I just think that in your heroism, however you see that fit, to make sure that what it does is it doesn't make life any more dangerous for literally anyone else on this planet.
Mhm. We are indoctrinated, and we may not be highly indoctrinated, but we're all indoctrinated. And there are some people, some cultures that indoctrinate their children more so. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something that, nature nurture, that sticks with you, that we need to we really need to realize that, where and not react completely the other way. In other words, oh, well, I was indoctrinated as a white person, therefore all white people are bad. You don't need to do one or the other. You just need to start thinking. And that can be difficult for people because
Yeah.
they feel protected, they feel comfortable, they feel secure. It's an identity that they share with a family type of things. Sometimes you need to step out a little bit just to see from the bird's eye view in. Maybe maybe those people, those people that people always refer to, the others, those
Yeah.
people are the same as you are. They
Exactly.
need security. They need to know that, that they're accepted. They need to be loved. They need to be able to sleep at night. They need to feed their young. They need to go to work. They need to do all the same things. They've been indoctrinated so that they can do those things. It's not good to indoctrinate.
Yeah. It's
Not
not.
good to set up propaganda. But we've all been somewhat propagandized. I remember being very young, very, very young. Being in school, out in the schoolyard, and a bunch of girls, and one girl shouted out, you killed Jesus Christ." And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I turn around, I'm looking around. First of all, who is Jesus Christ? Because I'm little and I'm Jewish and I don't know who Jesus Christ is.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I killed you? She's talking to me? And I went home and I asked my mother, and we had to have that conversation. And we're talking elementary school.
Yeah.
So here, she's been indoctrinated, and now I'm being indoctrinated. My mother's doing it now.
Yeah.
And it's our responsibility to ask the questions, to ask the hard questions, and to
Yeah.
recognize, okay, this person may be, may hate me, may totally hate me. Why do they hate me? And do I really need to extend it and make it worse, and proliferate it and justify it? You know, the world continues to do this. When we educate it, it's like, the the poor people versus the bureaucrats. I'm not saying we need to give the bureaucrats their due, but we need to understand, where did the bureaucracy come from? Why are the people poor? Ask the questions. Just don't learn the lesson. Ask the questions. And it's difficult. Again, I'm coming from, I love history.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to see all the different stories of all the different actors in history. And then you realize we don't even know the truth anymore, because it's been written from this side, from that side, then
Yeah.
rewritten by someone a scribe. We don't even know.
Yeah, no, that's completely true. You're right. And you don't also know, like, I think that people might not realize the like inherent bias that they have towards other people, but that it exists
Yeah,
still
yeah,
there,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah. I mean, very simple. I don't like fat people. What? Where did that come from? Or, I don't like blondes. And a lot of it, there's inherent jealousy. There's so much going on. We're human beings. We have so much going on. And when we start to project that out, and we do it simply by just thinking they're others, and not
Yeah.
saying, well, what does that mean? What are they like? Well, you find out, they have brothers and sisters, and all of those things. They are living, breathing people.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. They don't like me either. Okay. All right. Well, okay. So let's see, what can we do here? Maybe I can find one person that I can talk with. One of my here's a quest. One of my quests. I'm fascinated by, and as I said before, I look at Long Island and I see where it was 300 years ago. And I'm fascinated by the native element. I know that there is a native element on Long Island. They're called the Shinnecox. And it's slightly sad that it's, they've been corralled into an area of Long Island called Shinnecock, and there are tribes there, and it's et cetera, et cetera. And I'm so interested in speaking with these people, and I'm reaching out to speak with them, and they won't speak to me. And I've had a number of people tell me I'm an outsider. They don't want to talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, but all of their history, they know. We don't know. They need to share it. It's not ours, but it belongs to Long Island. We need to know it. How do we get there? And, I think that if people looked at the other like that it's a shared history now.
I completely agree. I'm also like very surprised by like if I had like a best friend that lived in Gaza right now, like if I could speak with them and hear what life is like and try to gain an understanding in that way, if you don't think that I would, like I would do that in a second. I do find that in this particular instance that like it almost seems like nobody even wants to hear like lived experience of people living here. It's like I've already decided, so what could possibly, like, how could that affect me? And it's like a story doesn't need to make you change all of your opinions. A story just needs to make you learn more and understand more and soak that in. So I think that that's great that you are asking to hear those stories, because I think that's the first step. And it's an important first step, just to
We all need to hear
be able
those
to hear stories.
stories. We all need to hear
Yeah,
those
and that's
stories.
why I came on the podcast, is like this is really, it's a difficult subject for me to talk about, because it's like you're going through something traumatic, but you also don't want to say the wrong thing. That
Right.
then,
And
it's
inevitably you're going to
yeah, and
someone.
inevitably you're going to. Exactly. And so then, but I was like, okay, but if I'm asking more people to hear my story, then maybe I should start giving it out more,
Yeah, but I think that, if we all share the stories that we can, for those of us who can share the stories, if we all do that, and do it in an atmosphere where it's not contentious. It's not meant to prove anything. It's a story. Once upon a time, there was me. This is what I feel. This is what I think. What's your story? Because maybe my story and your story connect, and maybe there's another story behind that story.
Yeah.
And that's how we all connect. And
Exactly.
we may, I talk with my sister. We talk about things that happen to us at the same time. And we're telling two different stories. Period.
Exactly.
Period. Oh, that's not what happened. Yeah, it is. Then we'll argue about it. And now we're mad. That's the point. Cut it out.
Yeah.
We are going to see these things through a different lens. Appreciate the fact that we're doing that. Try to check it out, because maybe that understory is yet another story that circles the whole story that you're unaware of. Oh,
Yeah.
I tell the story and my sister tells a different story. What was she going through that day? Because obviously she's telling a different story than I am. And maybe she's not right and I'm wrong, but maybe there's another, back to the onion, there's another layer here that I'm totally unaware of. And it's her story.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily,
Exactly.
I don't like to, the concept of truth is rough. Like, the truth. What is the truth? Good luck with that. The point is that we only can learn the truth by sharing stories.
Yeah.
And then we
Exactly.
learn how big the truth is. And that's when we become human, because that's when you realize that for the people that were hiding Anne Frank, and then for those people that ratted her out. If those people now, you put them in a room together and they start talking about what was going on, I can guarantee you there'd be some light bulbs going on and off in everybody's heads. Would they ever get together? This is a fictional thing. It's a great movie. Maybe I'll make it. I think they did. But
Well, I mean, it's exactly like when you have a conversation here between like a Jewish Israeli and an Arab Israeli, or that somebody like my best friend, her neighbor is Horatio's family live in Gaza, and for some reason those conversations are much easier to have and are much more able to find common ground and discussion than I have with any single person I've been able to speak to in the United States. And that, I think, is really saying something.
yes,
That like when you are far away from what's happening,
yes,
you're able to have a much different conversation that could be much more volatile, that can be much more, this is X, this is Y, this is how life is. But when you're actually speaking with people who are living it, like how is that I'm much more able to have a conversation with a woman whose whole family is still living in Gaza, but I can't have a conversation with a friend of mine who's living in a suburb in the United States?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
what
yeah,
is
yeah.
that? It's
Because
crazy.
yeah,
It's just like, and it's not doing it justice for anyone that anyone's thinking they're helping. Because the only way that we can get through something like this, that we could build back in a better way,
mm-hmm,
is through discussion.
mm-hmm.
And
And that's what
anyone
social was
who's
supposed to
living like,
be, but it's
yeah,
backfired quite a bit.
yeah,
So
yeah,
if anybody can get anything out of this, it's that, that social post that you're reading that's really irritating you. Don't unfriend that person. Think about it for a second. Maybe have
reach
another
out.
conversation with somebody. Find out where that person's coming from. I've seen so many different, I've listened to podcasts, I've seen so many different discussions. And when I'm confronted with a heated conversation from someone who is pro Gaza and of Middle East element in the Middle East. I mean, they're not from the U.S. They're
Mm-hmm.
perhaps speaking from some country outside of the U.S. And they're presenting me with a completely different idea of what is going on through their eyes.
Mhm.
It confuses the heck out of me. And immediately I want to turn it off. I don't want to hear it. And I somewhat force myself as much as I can to listen, just to get an idea of what can be said on the complete other side and where some people's ideas are coming from. And
Agreed.
I'm totally confused by it. Is it untrue? I don't know. I think to myself, could that possibly be true?
Yeah, I mean, but when I'm hearing this, I'm also like, but what is like this idea of like pro Gaza? It's like I just also wanted to get across that like being pro Israel does not mean that you're anti Gaza.
Right.
And the more that I speak with, and I'm gonna be completely honest and say that I live in Tel Aviv and I'm a gay woman. Like my circles are very liberal. When you talk with people, a lot of the people that you'll talk with here also truly believe that to remove Hamas would be beneficial in a lot of ways to innocent people, civilians living in Gaza. Like a friend of mine made the comparison that like we all watch CSI or whatever. Like, does somebody go from zero to doing the things that were done on October 7th in an hour? They don't. This is after years and years of hitting, of violence, of all of like other little violent acts that build up to something like that. You do not go from being a completely peaceful person to going and burning a home full of people alive in it, you know? Like to think about what other people have had to live through before this in order for that buildup to have happened. I think that what's missing in this is that it's not when people say that they're pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, it's not that then they think that the other side deserves death. It's that really they believe that that will make the other people in that other place more safe. At least here is what I mean.
Mhm.
That like this false dichotomy that to be one means that you hate the other. Sometimes to be one means that you really believe that that outcome will make life better for other people as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's just like an important thing to keep in mind
Yes.
as we're
Well,
speaking about it.
as I said, um, or like you said, and what I was thinking was, the only thing that I can compare to in the U.S. You don't get an adult going to a school and shooting up everyone in a school overnight. It doesn't happen overnight.
And when they do, this might be controversial to say, but when they do, you'd watch before you say, but what did they do to deserve that? What did maybe a parent, like the government, do to deserve that? These are real people that are living real lives. And when somebody comes into a school and does something like that, you don't look at the kid who was injured and say, but did he bully them? Because even if he did, that doesn't mean that they deserved that. Even if even if somebody's parents were these colonial settlers that you're thinking of, when they go to a dance festival in the desert, that doesn't mean that they deserved that. And I think that that needs to be like kept in mind here.
Mm-hmm.
That there are a lot of layers to this that are a lot more complicated than just saying like, yeah, but let's put this into context.
Yeah.
Just like I would never say that what the destruction that's happening in Gaza to civilians like is any sort of
Justice.
justice for what happened. Like that there's no justice that exists on either
It's
side that makes another person
overcompensating.
deserve,
It's a language of thought where you think you can compensate for the injustice by flipping it and creating
Mhm.
it for the other. That
Yeah.
serves no purpose. I hear you. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate your time. I'm grateful. I want you to be safe and shalom, shalom. What can I say? Let there be peace.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me on and letting me talk about this, and I appreciate your time.